And now, listeners, thanks to our generous sponsor, Valancourt Books, we bring you an adaptation of the short story, Walsham Grange, written by E. Morant Cox and first published in the Illustrated London News in the year 1885. Available today in Valancourt Books' Victorian Christmas Ghost Stories, Volume 2. Now, we take your ears and mind to the creepiest and curiously creakiest place in Green Valley. This is the Squeaky Floorboard, Ghosts in the Drawing Room.
And now, the Squeaky Floorboard. Hello, listeners. This is Vincent Woulf, broadcasting to you from the Squeaky Floorboard. It's been some time since I last graced the airwaves, but here I am again, inside my humble boarding house, with a tale of ghosts and miscreants and dinner parties. This is the story of when my family came to own the Squeaky Floorboard. This is Ghosts in the Drawing Room. The Squeaky Floorboard stands along the riverfront. It was, and some say remains, a lonely and desolate manor house, with a bad name among the locals. A horrible murder had been committed there in the days past, and the house was haunted. For generations, Green Valley residents have spoken queer tales of fearful shrieks and strange lights flitting from room to room. Indeed, it is the definition of a haunted house. My Great Uncle Frederick Woulf found minor success in the antique trade and wanted to settle down far from the hustle and bustle of the city. Word got around, and an old friend named James Bernard Herman rang Frederick up.
This is Frederick Woulf.
Freddy boy, it's your old pal James.
James Bernard Herman. How'd you know I was in town?
Oh, word gets around quickly in Green Valley. I hear you're also looking for a place to purchase.
Well, yes I am, but what would you be asking me about that for? Unless... Oh, you're not going to push that old house you inherited on me, are you?
It's not just a house, Fred. It's a whole estate, along the river, and with a little land alongside it, too.
Yes, and a murder in the drawing room.
That's an old story.
It's a true story.
Even so, I'd be willing to...
James, thank you, but the upkeep alone wouldn't make sense for me. I'd have to take on tenants to make it work, and no one is going to live in a haunted boarding house.
Look, Wolf, please, take that old estate off my hands. I inherited it and can't afford to maintain it. It seems a pity to let the old place go to wreck and ruin, but no one will stay because of that nonsense about the ghosts. But you, Fred, are a sensible man, a man with a bit more in his coin purse, too. And you shall have the place, grounds and all, for a mere song, and I tell you what, give a regular good Halloween party, fill the house with friends, invite us down, and we'll find out all about the ghosts, and you can see how the place suits you.
My Great Uncle Woulf was convinced, and he loved the idea of a dinner party on Halloween in the most haunted place in town. But first, he and James Bernard Herman went down there together to test the old estate before Halloween. Evening was just setting in when they reached the estate.
Well, here it is.
The floorboard squeak.
It's an old house. I'm sure someone can sort that out. Just look at the entryway, though. Isn't it inviting?
Yes, I can't deny that. Something is quite odd, though.
What's that?
It's awfully quiet in here.
Well, it is just us, unless you actually give credence to those ghost stories.
Right. What on earth was that?
It was a door in the drawing room.
Quick, grab that lantern. Let's see what caused it.
You brought a gun?
Yes.
To kill a ghost.
What if we aren't dealing with a ghost?
Be sensible, Wolf. It's just us here. We walked the whole estate ourselves when we arrived.
Right, James. You said there aren't any ghosts, remember? Something had to shut that door. Who's the sensible one here?
It looks like I was right, too. The drawing room door is shut.
And there's no draft in here either. Oh, look! The door on the other side of the drawing room just flung open. I see something.
Wolf!
I saw something.
Don't do too much of that. It's bad for the furniture.
A dark figure slid down that hall.
I think it was your shadow.
Nothing more happened, so they persuaded themselves that it must have just been the wind. And when they came to doubt themselves a little while later, they found confidence once again after a smoke and a glass of grog, before they finally went to bed.
Hello, listeners. I'd like to take this moment to speak briefly about our sponsor for this broadcast, Valancourt Books. Valancourt Books is an independent small press specializing in the rediscovery of rare, neglected, and out-of-print fiction. Despite the valiant efforts of a few small presses, far too many great books remain out of print and inaccessible. Valancourt Books was founded to restore many of these works to new generations of readers. If you are a lover of historical literature, or know someone who is, seek out Valancourt Books. And now, we return to the continuation of The Squeaky Floorboard, Ghosts in the Drawing Room.
The next morning, both Great Uncle Woulf and his friend, James Bernard Herman, awoke and decided upon breakfast to explore the whole estate once more, but found nothing that would point to the strange occurrences of the previous night. Halloween arrived a few days later, and their guests arrived at the sunset. At first, not a word was said about the ghosts, and all were in good cheer. But this old, squeaky house was full of mystery and intrigue, and it was only a matter of time till someone asked,
"So, tell us, is there any truth about the ghosts?"
Up until last night, I would have said no.
What happened last night?
Nothing.
It wasn't nothing, James.
You said yourself, last night you didn't think it was ghosts.
I don't know what to think. It was an odd night.
Where did all of this happen?
The drawing room.
That makes sense. There may or may not be ghosts, but there certainly was a murder here. Many years ago, in that old drawing room. If there was a ghost in this estate, it would surely be in that room.
Now, let's not bring up such dreadful things. That was a long time ago.
I say we go find this ghost.
Yeah.
What do you say, James?
Let us all go to the drawing room then. But Frederick, leave the revolver this time.
and so the Halloween dinner party moved to the drawing room. Suspense filled the air, and the guests were entranced by tales of murder and dark figures in hallways. But that suspense was kept tempered by the collective thinking that this was all just a story, until suddenly the lights cut off, and the doors began to slam violently. The guests froze in silence as all of this noise and chaos surrounded them in the dark, until one observant little guest exclaimed,
"What is that over there?"
but before any of the other guests could see anything, a low wail commenced far away, gradually coming nearer and nearer.
What's that awful moaning?
That question was answered with the sound of a vase breaking on the ground. It was then that the guests allowed themselves to panic, scream, and faint, scared out of their wits, until finally, a few moments later, the ominous moan faded away.
Is everyone all right?
I think it's over.
Didn't any of you see it?
What, dear child?
The dark shadow I saw on the far side of the room.
And look, that's where the vase broke.
I told you it wasn't Ghost, James.
Hang on. This very well could be paranormal, and frankly, more explainable than whatever you're conjuring up in your mind, Wolf.
How did I conjure up a dark figure in the hall? I'm not the only one that has seen it now.
I didn't think it was ghosts either, but what else would it be?
A miscreant of some sort, who's trying to frighten us.
For what purpose, Fred? Besides, we've searched the house twice now. It's just us all here in the drawing room.
We all must search it a third time then, and discover the rascal.
So, the Halloween dinner party turned into a ghost hunt, which then turned into a search for an elusive miscreant. The whole party searched together, going over the east wing, where the screams seemed to have originated. But nothing could be seen or heard. One guest suggested,
Perhaps it's cats.
Yes, I believe I saw a cat or two on the grounds earlier.
and so, feeling infinitely more relieved from this conclusion, they all went merrily to the dining room for a nightcap. An hour or so passed as they processed the night's events, and as the guests dispersed for bed in the various bedrooms of the estate, a yell of agony rang out through the house. The next morning at dawn, the guests of the estate all slowly assembled in the dining room for breakfast. Everyone looked scared and shaky. One guest, Mrs. Ross, was quite hysterical.
I would die here if I slept another night in this creaking old house.
My great uncle's friend, James, nodded solemnly as Miss Ross left the estate, followed by a few other guests, unsettled by the events of the last night. Frederick quietly remarked to James,
She sure seems a bit frazzled.
Aren't we all?
Sure, but ghosts aren't anything to actually worry about.
Yes, well, before Mrs. Ross called the taxi, she informed me of something she saw in her room last night.
What did she see?
She told me as she dozed off, she saw a panel on the wall open up, and behind it were two dark figures.
Miscreants.
Perhaps.
But what do you suggest we do about it?
I suppose we round up what's left of the party and take a visit to the bedroom Mrs. Ross slept in last night.
A complete search was made of the bedroom in question, but no sliding wall panel could be found. After much debate as to the cause of Miss Ross's hysteria, guests began to follow in her footsteps. Out the door.
Look here, boys. You're sensible men, and I know you don't believe in ghosts, and I think it's not right for us to lend ourselves to such absurd folly. And As a father of a family, I shall not consent to watch for a ghost. So good day.
And off he left. The final guests pondered a bit longer, but by lunchtime they had all left, with the last guest telling them both.
You know it's only cats, and Mrs. Ross had a nightmare. I agree with the others. This is all nonsense.
So the estate was simply uninhabitable, much to the disgust of James and my great uncle Frederick. Lights were seen burning more brightly than ever in the windows of the old place, and many passer-by walking on the outskirts of the property after dark were half scared out of their wits by the awful shrieks that echoed through the deserted house. Of course, the story about the ghosts and the Halloween dinner party made a great sensation in Green Valley, and kept everyone's tongues wagging for months. The guests were questioned over and over again by their friends, but while nearly all the visitors to the estate declared that they had never passed such a terrible time before in their lives, and would not enter the old house again, there were a great many friends who lamented bitterly that they had not been invited. But, as the guests of the Squeaky Floorboard know, that isn't how the story ends.
Well, listeners, while we all collect ourselves after such a riveting and suspenseful scene, allow me to speak briefly on our sponsor for this broadcast, Valancourt Books. We especially want to bring your attention to Valancourt's incredible array of Victorian Christmas ghost stories. In fact, you're listening to an adaptation of one right now. During the Victorian era, it became traditional for publishers of newspapers and magazines to print ghost stories during the Christmas season for chilling winter reading by the fireside or candlelight. Valancourt Books is the first publisher to collect these stories, which are quite diverse and include a wide range of historic and horrific tales from a group of authors, some well-known, others anonymous or forgotten. Readers whose only previous experience with Victorian Christmas ghost stories has been Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol will be surprised and delighted at the astonishing variety of ghostly tales Valancourt Books has to offer with their series of Victorian Christmas ghost stories. So seek them out for yourself, or perhaps a loved one, and order pieces of fiction truly unique. And now, while you ponder doing that, let us return to the chilling conclusion of The Squeaky Floorboard, Ghosts in the Drawing Room.
Thanksgiving came and went, and Christmas was fast approaching. One day, who should turn up but my great Uncle Frederick's brother, Francis Woulf. My grandfather, and a well-regarded lawman at this time, was visiting after months of investigating smugglers in Tinseltown.
Enough about my exploits with those smugglers in Tinseltown. How are you? Someone tells me you purchased an estate of some intrigue.
That's right, I did. It's beautiful and sits on a lovely bank of the river, but...
What is it?
Well, it sounds absurd, but the whole estate is dreadfully haunted.
Haunted?
My great-uncle Woulf then recounted the experiences that he, experienced in the estate. But instead of laughing, as he expected his brother to do, my grandfather took very great interest in the story and asked him to tell it a second time. Until, at one point, Grandpa Francis jumped up and banged on the table and shouted,
Of course, I've got it. Look here, brother. You get your old pal, James Bernard Herman, and put on a second and final dinner party for Christmas, and I'll be sure to clear that old house of its ghosts.
James was delighted. He, too, had long been contemplating another visit to the estate, and so a plan was hatched between the three of them.
Well, the party arrangements sound grand, but there's one thing you must leave to me.
What is it?
You must let me provide you with the servants. Perhaps they won't be the best servers, but you mustn't mind that. And they'll be rather fond of rum.
Fine, Francis, fine. But for what purpose in regards to the ghosts?
All in good time, brother. Just don't let it be known that I hired the servants.
All this secrecy, you must tell us something.
Let's just say these servers are quite adept in catching ghosts.
And so a Christmas dinner party was set, and invitations were sent. And the secret plan to rid the estate of its ghosts was set in motion. Guests arrived with a glint of excitement, which only grew in intensity as the sun set. As with most dinner parties, there was the usual small talk, but nearly every conversation led back to the purpose of the evening and the possibility of seeing something from beyond. The servers did their job, but quite clumsily. Their method of waiting at a table was decidedly peculiar, and created a great deal of merriment as the courses were served. Indeed, the merriment grew to such a peak that one guest, Mrs. Ross of all persons, exclaimed,
"With all this Christmas cheer, perhaps the ghosts are actually gone."
It was a moment later that a door was heard banging in the drawing room. Then another, and another, then another, and another. The servants bolted to the drawing room, followed by the guests. Everyone was huddled together, and once the murmur of excitement died down, everyone was silent, until they heard a noise upstairs. Francis yelled to the guests,
"Stay here. Men, follow me."
Above the guests came sounds of a struggle, a gunshot, and then silence.
"It's all right, everyone, it's all right. We've got him."
Got whom?
Why, the ghosts, or one of them, at any rate. Here he is. Look at him.
The servants, now clearly colleagues of my grandfather Francis, re-entered into the drawing room with the ghost. Certainly an awful-looking ruffian, white with rage and mortification at his discovery. He called himself Jack, but he told us no more, as he loudly regretted that his pistol had misfired.
So, this is the man who's been causing all this trouble.
Like I said, one of them. I suspect there are more.
We searched this house top to bottom when we arrived. Where would they be hiding?
He was running upstairs to evade us, so there must be... I've got it.
Got what?
Tie him up tight to the banister, then come along to the room Miss Ross was staying in.
And there, sure enough, was a panel of the wall missing from Mrs. Ross's room. But upon further inspection, it was missing the whole time, and merely hidden behind a painting. The canvas could be raised and lowered like a window shade, and inside the opening in the wall was a passageway.
Follow me, boys,
Yelled Francis, snatching a lantern from one of his men and jumping through the panel. Frederick and James were after him like lightning, followed by Francis's colleagues in disguise. They found themselves in a narrow passage, running inside the walls of several rooms, and leading to a winding staircase. After descending cautiously for some way, they saw a light at the foot of the stairs. "Hello, Jack," came a voice. Have you scared those folks out of there?
I'm afraid your ghost had his final scare.
And before the man had time to recover himself from the surprise, Francis had thrown him to the ground and snatched a pistol from his belt. Some 8 or 10 men, sitting round a fire, were as quickly pinned by my grandfather's colleagues. There was but very little resistance made, for they all seemed quite dazed at a sudden onslaught. On examination, my great-uncle, grandfather, and James Bernard Herman found they were in an old and well-stocked cellar, filled with casks of spirits, wines, silks and satins, and all kinds of excisable goods. Then it was understood why Francis was so anxious to know more about the ghosts, for they proved to be a gang of the most notorious smugglers from Tinseltown. Indeed, ultimately the band of miscreant smugglers confessed that they had shammed ghosts to keep the estate empty. Francis and his men found the cellar led to a subterraneous passage to the woods at the back of the property, the entrance being completely hidden by thick ivy. But after all, that gang got off scot-free, for it could not be proven that they had smuggled those particular goods, nor even that the goods had been smuggled. Little did anyone know at the time that that group of smugglers would be the first crime family of Tinseltown. But they would never use the estate after that night, for it was then in the hands of my great-uncle Frederick Woulf, and would remain his until it was passed on to me. But that's a story for another time. For now, I best do a walk-through of the old cellar and see if any real ghosts might be lurking in the damp, dank darkness. Farewell, listeners. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to The Squeaky Floorboard, Ghosts in the Drawing Room, adapted from the short story Walsham Grange, written by E. Morant Cox. This broadcast was generously sponsored by Valancourt Books. Ghosts in the Drawing Room was adapted and written to the characters and setting of Green Valley by Nick Seider. Vincent Woulf was performed by Kevin Bowler. Frederick Woulf was performed by Danny Havoc Garcia. James Bernard Herman was performed by Rance McCullough. Mrs. Ross was performed by Lis Dye. Willie D. Johnson was performed by Cody Livernash. Little Richie Johnson was performed by Wes Livernash. Virginia Hackett was performed by Olivia McNally. Francis Woulf was performed by Clancy Bundy. And The Ghost was performed by Mark Thayer. Our Patreon production team is credited as follows. Executive producers, Travis Traber and Larry Cameron. Producers, Dave C., Nathan Oval, Alex Solano, Ryan Gray, Laura Miller, Riley Brent, and Julia Kernan. Associate producers, Jessica Kernan, Clark Silva, Cybersynth, and Michelle McMullen. Music used in this broadcast is a recording of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. Sounds heard in this broadcast are sourced from Freesound and are licensed as Creative Commons. This broadcast is a work of fiction produced by Nick Seider. All characters and voice dialogue are owned by Seider and Company. Thanks for listening.